Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. For today's video, we're gonna talk about SAP exchange rate and foreign currency valuation. Now this is going to be split into two videos. So part 1 will cover the currency and exchange rate. Part 2 will focus on foreign currency valuation or FCV. And towards the end of that part 2 video, we do have a summary table where we wrap up all of the things that we've discussed. To give you an expectation on these two-part videos, we will cover key differences between the two, the configurations, transaction codes, as well as the summary. As always, I will be using my blog post as the main teaching aid for this tutorial. I will leave the link down in the description box below. So if you're looking for more in-depth explanations, or if you want to go back to the transaction codes provided, so on and so forth, you can always go through the blog post for guidance. Now, before we deep dive into SAP exchange rates and foreign currency valuation, it does help to understand the differences between the two. A lot of people end up asking or end up confused when it comes to exchange rate and foreign currency valuation. What exactly is the difference between the two? Allow me to introduce this image below and mention that exchange rates basically go hand in hand with foreign currency valuation. They are within the same theme or topic, which is exchange rates, but they do differ in terms of the task and purpose. What do I mean by that? If we take a look at the image down below, we have two columns. The first one is usual daily tasks, and the second one is month and close tasks. What does this mean? In the simplest way I can explain, if we're talking about exchange rate maintenance and the corresponding financial postings, the daily transactions that involve different currencies in SAP, it falls under the usual daily tasks. We do this every day, we have transactions every day most likely, and we're dealing with several currencies. When I say exchange rate maintenance, this is basically you trying to maintain the rates for the different currencies, exchange rates in SAP. So what is the equivalent of $1 to your local currency, for example? It really depends. But we will tackle this later on. For foreign currency valuation or FCV, it falls under the second column and it's called month-end close tasks. This is the main key point for FCV. So when we talk about differentiating the two, I did include a summary statement. In a nutshell, exchange rates are maintained in SAP and are utilized in daily tasks through the usual financial postings and of course the maintenance of those rates. During financial closing, month-end or period-end close, we need to be able to perform foreign currency valuation. And we will talk about this in detail in part 2 of the video. For part 1, we will focus on currency exchange rates in SAP as well as the configuration and maintenance involved. We're going to start off with currency exchange rates in SAP. Let's take, for example, a company. So it may have transactions in different currencies. I mentioned that a while ago. So if a company is based in Europe and purchases from a foreign vendor, let's say that the vendor is based in the United States, you would most likely expect two different currencies involved. So you have euros and US dollars. SAP in turn should be able to handle this type of transaction with different currencies through the exchange rate functionality. So this is, considering that the necessary configurations, the maintenance are accurately set up in SAP. This brings us to the question, okay, if we're dealing with two different currencies and SAP should be able to handle this type of transaction, what is the purpose of exchange rate functionality in SAP? Why do we have to maintain these rates in SAP? This is where I'm going to introduce 3 purposes for exchange rates, and this is also found in the SAP help document I have linked over here. You can refer to that if you're interested. But basically, in summary, we do have 3 main purposes. Number 1 is posting and clearing. Number 2 is exchange rate differences. And number 3 is foreign currency valuation. When we say posting and clearing, I want you guys to try to visualize or recall the times that you've gone on a vacation in a foreign country. So let's say that you are traveling to South Korea. Realistically speaking, you will most likely check the exchange rate and do a conversion for the items you will pay for in their currency converted to your local currency. You have a budget in mind, you don't want to overspend, and so you do some sort of conversions between the two currencies. It helps give you a feeling how much you're spending for food, clothes, transportation all throughout your vacation. So in essence, when we're talking about posting and clearing, it is to translate amounts posted or cleared in the foreign currency. There's also a way to check a manually entered exchange rate during posting or clearing. And of course, you want to be able to see the converted amount of the concerned currencies during posting and clearing. Anything that has to do with financial documents that involve different currencies, you want to know the equivalent amount, foreign currency versus your local currency, so on and so forth. Next, we have exchange rate differences, and the analogy I have here is the possibility that during the time of payment, you may have differences in the amount. Why do we have that? Definitely when we're talking about exchange rates, one US dollar may not necessarily be the same value converted to your local currency as time passes. So it's not the same exchange rate today, next week, the next couple of weeks. So you get the gist. And because of these types of differences that may occur, it could either be a gain or loss. I did mention here that in terms of exchange rate differences, SAP should be able to help you determine the gains or losses from exchange rate differences. I also reiterated that the rates frequently changes and the exchange rate today may not be the same rate tomorrow, so you'll expect some differences. If 1 US dollar is equivalent to 5 Japanese yen today, and the next day it could be 1 US dollar is equivalent to 100 Japanese yen. So this is of course an extreme unrealistic example, but I hope you get the logic behind it. Lastly, we do have foreign currency valuation, FCV, and we will get to this later on. I don't want to add so much information at this part of the video, but to give you an insight, it's basically to evaluate open items in foreign currency. And of course, we did mention that we do this during period end close or part of financial closing tasks. This time, we're going to talk about the configuration and maintenance of exchange rate in SAP. So the first transaction code that we will focus on is OY03, and this is the currency maintenance. The first thing you need to do is maintain the needed foreign currency. In our example, it's KRW. This of course considers that the company's local currency is maintained as well. Our example, it is euros. Below, you'll see a screenshot of OY03. I maintained KRW over here, the long text as South Korean won, short text, I just abbreviated it a bit, and for ISO, we have KRW. So this is the standard, and you can search for that online. Once you're done with this line, you can select it and click on the magnifying glass. You'll end up with this type of screen. It's basically the same. And we do have additional fields here. For example, alternative key, valid until, as well as the primary checkbox. Over here, if you'll notice, I mentioned that alternative key for currency is only utilized in Spain and Belgium. So here you can define a key term for currencies which differ from the ISO code. But you can read more about that if you just select the field over here and hit F1 on your keyboard. For the primary checkbox, this simply denotes primary SAP currency code for the ISO code. And again, if you're interested to know more about this, you can click on the checkbox and hit F1 for more information. We're done with OY03. If you notice, we left the valid until field because, it's okay. It will be usable until further notice, so we can leave that blank, it's fine. Moving on to the next transaction code, it's OY04, and this is where you define decimal places for currency codes. So in case you need this type of maintenance, you can define the decimal places for the concerned currency. So in our case, we just set it to 0. We do have KRW currency over here. The same long text is provided, and the decimals are set to 0. Next up, we have OB07. This is where you maintain currency translation exchange rate types. And here we define the exchange rate type M for standard translation at average rate. This is quite a handful to digest at the moment, but you can always refer to the blog post. Over here, I do have a screenshot of OB07. I maintained letter M for the exchange rate type. The usage is standard translation at average rate. I left these 3 fields blank and selected the INV checkbox, left the others blank. And if you're interested to know more about what this type of setup or fields mean, you can go through these information provided. So for example, if we're talking about this INV checkbox, you can refer to this one. It basically stands for inverter exchange rate. This is simply an indicator. If there is a missing exchange rate entry in the system for the required translation from one currency into another, the inverted exchange rate relationship may be used. For example, if you have USD to KRW maintained in SAP, the inverter exchange rate indicator will tell SAP, okay, since we do not have KRW to USD available in SAP, we have the inverter exchange rate selected. That means we can use the opposite. So SAP can use USD to KRW maintenance. Next up, we have OBBS transaction code, and this is currencies translation ratios. We maintain these types of ratios for the purpose of basically trying to understand the relationship between currencies. It is maintained per exchange rate type. Inflation impacts the relationships between currencies. So translation ratios are maintained on a time period basis. This maintenance is done way less than the succeeding maintenance of exchange rates because the rates fluctuate daily. When we're trying to differentiate the translation ratios maintenance to exchange rates, this is being done way less. And we do have an example over here below. If we're trying to maintain USD to GBP and USD to JPY, they will have different translation ratios. What do I mean by different translation ratios? Here you'll notice that when we maintain USD to GBP, it has a ratio of 1:1 because $1 is equivalent to 0.79 GBP. On the other hand, when we're talking about USD to JPY, it will have a ratio of 1:100 because 1 USD is equivalent to 107.77 JPY, at least on that date. If we take into consideration our example of KRW to euros, it will have a ratio of 1:1 because 1 KRW is equivalent to 0.00074 euros. That means that when I maintain transaction code OBBS for this KRW to euros, I will maintain it as follows. So I retain the exchange rate type to letter M. We have from currency KRW to currency to euros. We have the valid from date, and we do have a ratio over here. So 1:1 as mentioned. The next step would be transaction code OB08, and this is where we maintain the currency exchange rates. OB08 is also accessible by this transaction code in case you're looking for an alternative way to access it. And on a high level note, the concept of exchange rate maintenance would follow the table below. So you'll have the exchange rate type, you have M, valid from date, and the from and to currencies. So if you'll notice here in our OB08 screenshot, we do have exchange rate M valid from KRW and then euros on the last column. One thing to take note of is that the ratio from and the ratio to columns are grayed out. And the reason why this happens is because it's going to take whatever configuration you maintained in OBBS. So a while ago, we maintained a 1:1 ratio. When we save this, we should expect values like 1:1. You'll also notice there are columns called indirect quotation and direct quotation. So here we have 0, and for the direct quotation, we have the 00074 euros. If you're interested to know more about the difference between direct and indirect, you can refer to the image over here. Basically, when we say direct, it is one foreign currency for the local currency. When we talk about indirect, it's one local currency for the foreign currency. So this is the key difference here. When we say direct, we're talking about $1 is equivalent to 0.8800 euros. But when we're talking about indirect, we're talking about the local currency first. So that means 1 euros is equivalent to 1.1300 US dollars. And in our example, taking into consideration again KRW in euros, we dealt with the direct quotation. We maintained one foreign currency and equivalent to our local currency. So 1 KRW is equivalent to 0.00074 euros. That's basically it for SAP exchange rates and currency. We talked about the key differences between exchange rate maintenance and foreign currency valuation. We talked about the configurations as well as the transaction codes. Again, please stay tuned for part 2 where we discuss foreign currency valuation, and towards the end we will provide a summary of everything. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.